Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is sponsored by
The Usual John.
How usual are you, John? Because you wanted us to shout out 2 podcasts. I've listened to one, and I haven't listened to the other one. So you want us to do a shout out to Team Earthling at teamearthling.com. They're also on Vegan Food. And I've listened to Team Earthling.
And they've even shouted out us.
Yeah, they're awesome. So definitely check them out. And there's another one that I'd never heard of, which is Progressive Podcast Australia.
Yeah.
Which kind of sounds like right up our alley because it's a anarchist podcast with vegan tendencies. That's kind of what we got from it.
That's progressivepodcastaustralia.com.
So check them out. Thank you, Usual John.
If you'd like to sponsor an episode, you can do so by going to whichsidepodcast.com and donating at least $10. That's how much it costs to produce one episode for you. So that's what we ask.
Just let us know if you want us to drop the name or shout out something
Or a boost.
Yeah,
A boost.
we'll do anything for you.
You will.
Yeah, I will. I'm cheap. This is episode 82.
Welcome to Which Side Podcast.
Did you know what? When I turn 82, that's like right around the years that I'll like drink alcohol for the first time. But it's not going to be like, oh, I'm going to have a sip of beer. It's going to be, give me a shot of tequila. I'm going to do a line of coke, shoot up heroin.
Into your scrotum.
Sure. I'm fucking 82.
Go big or go home.
That's right.
82. It's 82. The exact. It's not like 80 or 81 or 83. It's 82.
Right now it's 82.
82. All right.
I mean, it might change in the next 50 years. But, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll remember on your 82nd birthday.
You bring me the coke and the heroin, it's going in my body.
It'll probably be legal by that point.
Who do we have this week?
We have Comrade Black from Profane Existence.
Among others. He has
hats.
so many hats. I love this conversation. This is a conversation that I could have for hours and hours. So I hope you guys thoroughly enjoy this one. What events do we have going on this week?
Like I mentioned last time, I recently contributed to a zine called After Prison, along with other political prisoners like Rob Coronado, Josh Harper, Jeffrey Lurs, and they are still looking for donations on their Indiegogo project so that they can print and send these zines to former and current movement prisoners. That's the entire cost goes towards printing and getting those zines in the hands of prisoners.
God damn it, go support the prisoners, support the zine.
Also, Matt Miner, who we've had on a few times, just released a new comic book project that is on Kickstarter, and that is called Toe Tag Riot.
It sounds fucking hilarious and awesome.
It's about punk rock zombies that only eat the bad guys.
Like homophobics,
Westboro Baptist Church.
racist, just the people you wish you could fucking kill and eat. They do it for you.
So definitely go and check that out. Westboro Baptist Church actually tweeted it the other day.
Did they really?
Yes.
That's awesome, Matt. Good for you. June 6, 1798. U.S. Congress abolishes debtors' prisons. But, this is a big fucking but, you can still get put in prison today for debt in the United States. So, basically, they can fucking do anything. Thanks a lot, Congress.
Enjoy this episode. Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Let's get... Yep.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Jordan.
Hi, Jordan.
I'm Jeremy,
Can't
by the
see
way.
you, but I can hear you. Hello?
Yeah, we usually keep video off just because it helps with call quality.
Okay,
That's
should I
cool.
keep my video off?
Yeah, it with the video, sometimes it lags with the connection speed. Sweet. Plus, you don't want to see my fucking ugly mug.
I don't know. Never seen it. I have no clue how ugly it is.
It's ugly enough you don't want to see it.
You are pretty ugly. No, I'm just kidding. So how you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
Tired, but okay.
So, a couple days, well, it wasn't a couple days ago, I think it was a couple episodes ago, we were talking about using the word comrade. And I've never been a huge fan of the word comrade, so tell me your take on it.
I'm pretty indifferent to it. Like, it's my name. So in that case, I like it to be used because I hate when people try to make up something else as my name. But, some people will be like, oh, you mean Conrad? And it's like, no, I don't. That's not my name. Sorry. But as far as using it as to mean friend or ally, I'm kind of indifferent. If people feel comfortable with that word, sure. But I guess a lot of the time it just kind of sounds like they're trying to pretend that they're part of some revolutionary movement from 50 years ago that they're not part of.
Has anyone ever called you comrade?
Yeah, I get that once in a while. The best part is they all think they're totally original.
I don't.
What's another word you could say? It's not comrade. We were talking about.
Well, I mean, like the origins of the term stem out of the French Revolution when they wanted to stop using the fancy French terms for my lady and my lord, and that was the origins of it. So I get it, but I think it's you're saying, it's taken on too much of a 50s ISO socialist movement, connotation.
Mm.
Yeah, some people use it as irony too. That's its own thing. One thing about the term is it is gender neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
true.
it solves some of those problems.
Definitely.
That's another thing we've been talking about. So if you didn't use comrade, what is another good, general neutral term to use, do people instantly know that you're kind of radical and kind of, down, I guess. I don't know what the fucking word would be.
I don't know.
No clue.
I do like the, what is it, yo? For
a
pronoun.
Yeah, we've talked about yo as a gender neutral pronoun.
Well, there's always friend or buddy or whatever too, but
I'm not your buddy. Yeah.
So I was told that you have spent one day in jail.
Yep, not very long. It was kind of a shitty experience, but it was pretty lame. It's not exactly an exciting story either. It was for a failure to appear on shoplifting when I was 19.
So, has all these charges been resolved?
Yeah, years ago. Yeah, I got a what do they call that thing?
Like a bench
conditional
warrant?
Discharge. No, conditional discharge. It meant that if I met up to my conditions, I'd have no criminal record. But if I got charged with something in the future that would somehow relate, like another theft type charge, then it would count.
Okay, like expunging the records, but with a condition.
Yeah.
Huh.
So how was that experience? What led up to that?
Well, let's see. I was at the times living on the streets, and I was doing pretty rough. And I ended up going one day, staying at a friend's place after not being able to sleep the night before because my sleeping bag had been stolen by another street person. So I ended up passing out in his car on the way to his house, and he couldn't wake me up, so he left me in his car, and I woke up at about 5 a.m. freezing. Like, this is Edmonton in the middle of winter. Edmonton, Alberta. So it was, I don't know what that would be in Fahrenheit, but it was about probably minus 20 Celsius at that time.
It's getting close to that, yeah. Once negative 40, they're about the same.
Yeah. So I walked to a nearby mall, not knowing where the hell I was. I ended up finding a mall and decided that a good idea would be to go into the mall and warm up. But of course, I didn't get very warm because it was so cold. So I went into a Walmart and I put on a couple sweaters and walked around for a while, thinking that would warm me up, and it did. And then I figured that, nobody seemed to be paying attention, so I could just walk out. And they caught me, and at the time I kind of froze because it was a little bit stupid. They caught me. It was about 40 feet from a bus, and I could have just ran, and they'd have had to try and chase me off the property. But I didn't. I just kind of froze, and then I ended up, I was living in Lloydminster again. That was in Edmonton where that had happened. And I was, at the time, staying with my mother. It was pretty rough times for me then, so I went home. And I didn't want to tell her that I'd been charged with shoplifting, so I just didn't. And then I just pretended for a while it didn't happen. Then one night, I went out on Halloween dressed up as a mobster, and I had made this Thompson machine gun, had a copper barrel and the whole two bits. It looked pretty awesome. Handmade it. And sure enough, the cops pulled me over. The funny part of that story is that Lloydminster is right on the border of the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And so I was literally 5 feet from the border, but I was on the Saskatchewan side. And so when the cops ran my name, it came up that I had this warrant in Alberta. And so they told me that I should turn myself in at some point and get that dealt with. Because they couldn't actually arrest me since the warrant didn't apply where I was. So I did. I eventually went and turned myself in. And then I was sitting in the first, they put me in this little room with a phone and a phone book to call a lawyer, which is a little silly. Like, no lawyers can take that anyways. But they, sitting in that room, I could hear them through the wall talking, and they were talking about how they could just give me new walking papers and a new court date, but they thought that it would be better to scare me so that I wouldn't do something like this again. Of course, I could hear the whole thing, so it was a little bit... I don't know what to say on that. It just kind of pissed me off, to be honest.
Not very effective either.
What's
No.
really funny is that your story reminds me of Peter Young, who got arrested while he was on the run at a shoplifting charge at a Starbucks.
It reminds me of a time we were all walking out and the beeper went off, and I didn't know that one of the people I was with had shoplifted anything, and so we all went back in. And they made us all individually go out one at a time. And this is when we were kids. And it beeped again. And my friend just looks at us and he's like, run. And we all thought he was like kidding because we didn't know that he had stolen anything. And so we're just like, ha ha. We're just laughing at him. We're like, oh man, you're funny. And then he's like, oh shit. And then like all of a sudden, that shame, and he tilts his head down and he slowly walks back in and he's like, oh fuck. And we're like, oh shit. Well, better communication there.
Yeah, you should always it's never a good idea to shoplift when you're with people that don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. That is so true. So you were saying that during the first time you were living on the streets, what led to that? Was that by choice or by circumstance?
It's kind of in between those. I grew up 10 miles north of a town called Kitsgotty, which was a town of 700. The school in Kitsgotty from grade 7 to 12 had about 300 students, a little less. I think it was 270. And it was half those people were from surrounding towns that didn't even have schools, towns of 300 or 400. So I went to school in this place, and basically there was either you were a jock or a cowboy. And right from grade 1, I never fit in. It got worse as I got older. The bullying got worse, and they kind of hit a critical breaking point where I just I just started skipping school all the time, and I'd get rides into Lloydminster, which was a city that was about half an hour away. Lloydminster is a tiny city. It's about 20,000, and it's an oil town, so it's a very violent place. People just drive up and down the street looking for people to beat up as sport.
Jesus fuck.
So this is where I grew up. And there kind of hit this point when I was about 15 where, I was super suicidal, super depressed. One day I was walking through the mall in Lloydminster. I hadn't been home in a few weeks. I was walking with this older, kind of greasy, wannabe biker guy, and jokingly he said, "Want to go to Ontario?" And I said, "Sure," and we started hitchhiking that day. He was about 24, 25. He's one of these guys. He had two names, depending which one he had less warrants under.
How far is that to Ontario from there?
Trying to think. It was quite a trek. Like, Windsor, Ontario is basically where Detroit is, and Lloydminster was on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan. So, trying to think what states directly below that.
That would be Montana.
Yeah, so it's a good trek. It took us, trying to think, I think it took us 4 days, and we made really good time.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first time hitchhiking. First time really living on the streets. I went from Windsor. I spent a few weeks there. I started to think the whole world sucked when I got to Windsor because, I don't know if you've ever spent any time there, but it's a pretty miserable industrial place too. And so then after that, I ended up on the streets of Edmonton for quite a while. I lived in a squat near White Avenue in Edmonton. It was a lot different than it is now. There was about half as many bars as there is now, but it was still, it was a lot better than anything I had experienced. But at the same time, it was a pretty rough experience there too. Like, Edmonton's winters hit minus 30. The scene, there was a guy, one night I fell asleep in a squat and I woke up to everyone partying because they'd beaten a guy into a coma. It wasn't exactly a friendly, kind of sheltered lifestyle.
Is that kind of indicative of the whole, like, punk crust scene there? Like, it's very violent?
No, not at all. That's more indicative of Alberta.
Oh, okay.
And not all of Alberta. Like, Calgary has a really beautiful scene there right now. Lots of great young punks and stuff, but certain places in Alberta, you get these towns that are kind of isolated, and they're oil towns, so nobody that lives there actually is from there pretty much, except for the poor kids maybe. The rest of the people move there for work in the oil field, and they work 4 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So that means that you work 4 days or 16-hour days, 4 weeks in a row, and then you don't work for the next 3 weeks, but you have a whole pile of money. And of course, these people, they don't have any relationships there because they're not from there. And you can't really build relationships when you're gone for a month at a time all the time. So often they spend that money on cocaine and alcohol. And it's just a really rough redneck kind of place. Like, it's got the lowest drinking age in Canada and the cheapest beer. Highest paying jobs that require the lowest education.
What's the drinking age?
18.
18? And what's the normal drinking age in Canada?
I think most places it's 19, which isn't a huge difference. But
yeah.
It's 21 here. So.
Yeah, it's 21 here. So
yeah.
But that's kind of like how our cigarette thing in Utah, we have, what is it, like, it's a 19?
They're trying to change it. Right now, you can smoke at 18, but you can't purchase until you're 19. or have on you. So, like, if you're 18, someone can hand you a cigarette and you can smoke it, but you can't have it on you, like, transport it. And it's because they don't want, there's a lot of 18-year-olds still in high school, so they didn't want high school kids going to school with cigarettes.
Yeah.
They're trying to change it to just 19, though. And
I think they had something similar to that with smoking when I was a kid, too. Because I remember cops taking cigarettes away from us. This is before I was straight edge, obviously.
So what led to that? Like, how did you get involved in the straight edge scene, and how did you get make that change?
Well, that's interesting the way you phrase that, because honestly, I wasn't involved in the straight edge scene.
Okay.
I was the one random straight edge crust punk hanging out with the gutter punks. 4 years, I was like that. I had a drinking problem that was somewhat unacknowledged. I wasn't alcoholic, but if I drank, I got depressed. If I got depressed, I drank. So, it wasn't very good. And then when I get drunk, I'd end up, breaking up with my girlfriend at the time and getting in fights with friends. And, then I'd have some mob of random guys I didn't know who they were that were trying to beat me up at the bar, because that's Lloydminster. And it kind of hit this point where I ran out of money. I'd fucked up a lot of my relationships. I told my boss off, and he deserved to be told off, but it kind of was my fault that day. He was one of these really super greedy, born-again Christians who was just obnoxious as hell. And I should have told him off a year before, but I came into work still drunk that day from the night before. So anyways...
no, you can't stop a story of telling your boss off like that.
I don't even really... There's nothing too interesting about it. He just basically said these problems have got to stop. And I said, yeah, they're going to stop because I am quitting right now. And you have my 2 weeks notice. And it's like, there's nothing more to it than that. So, but I screwed up my whole life, and I kind of hit rock bottom. I ran out of money. I owed everyone at the bar a drink or two that I knew. So it kind of got to this point where I couldn't drink for a few months. And also my life got better. And then one night after a few months of not drinking, and I was starting to listen to bands like Minor Threat, and through some interview with Minor Threat, I read something that Ian MacKaye had said about how most fans of Earth Crisis probably wouldn't like what I had to say. So, of course, when I read that, I went and looked up Earth Crisis, read some interviews with them too, read more interviews with Minor Threat, some other folks, and then after about 2 months, I was hanging out with a couple of my exes. They wanted to go drinking. And I didn't really want to, but I ended up agreeing to it then because I wanted to hang out with them. And it was such a horrible, disastrous night where people got punched out and all kinds of shit went wrong. And after that, I just decided I'm never drinking again. About 2 weeks later, since I had been listening to all this straight edge stuff and reading on it, I quit smoking because it just seemed like, well, hey, if I can quit drinking, I can quit smoking. So I did. About 6 months after that, I quit eating meat. Because, of course, after years of listening to anarcho-punk bands like Conflict and Crust, many of which are vegetarian or vegan, Drop Dead and so on, then starting to listen to these bands like Earth Crisis that also promoted animal lib, it just seemed logical to me to make that progression. So I went vegetarian and then vegan.
What I've noticed as far as like a lot of the punk crust scene is that veganism in general is kind of shunned almost. Like it's not fully embraced, at least from what I've noticed here back in the day. Did you experience that same thing?
Well, I think that there's a lot of confusion between what is the crust scene and what is the traveler or gutter scene. Because not the same, but to most people standing outside of them, they see dirty kids with bad tattoos who are wearing patches that they can't read, and they assume they're the same group.
Jordan, which group are you in? That's
what?
just he has described you right now.
I'd probably be more crust.
Take a goddamn shower.
Anyway. So when I say crust, when I use the term crust, I'm using it in the sense of like bands like Amoebics and Ozrotten and Nausea and Profane Existence and all that kind of like these bands that are very political, that are mixing elements of punk, anarcho-punk, with elements of metal. And so you have this genre and this style. And the people, to me, that are crusties are people that are into that music, people that play in those bands, people that go to those shows, run the distros, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas some people use the term crust to refer to travelers and oogles and so on, which aren't really crusties because they have no involvement with the crust scene, and many of them are actually hostile towards it. That doesn't mean they're bad people. Some of the people in the traveler scene are great people too, and I have a lot of friends in that community as well. But some of them are also really fucked up. And a lot of those people, especially the ones who are really into the kind of train hopping, gutter punk, get drunk in every town, every day kind of lifestyle, are often very hostile towards veganism.
You know, it's interesting that you talked about the separation, because I am definitely guilty of combining them into one. As being one, you know, I was in the more the hardcore scene, so you know there wasn't a whole lot of crossover. But yeah, never really thought about it that way.
To be completely honest, I was a ska kid.
Yeah, fuck you.
So I went from that to hardcore. But yeah, like I think like a good example, there were some traveler kids here a few years back, and they had like a dog that was in the back of a truck, and it was tied up with a leash. It had fallen out, and they continued to drive while it was being dragged behind on a leash, and so it ended up killing the dog. And then they went and then slaughtered it behind the house, and they ate it. And
were they only keeping the animal for food?
No, they felt it was a way to connect with the animal, but like I wouldn't ever have equated like those people with like the crust community. They were completely different to me.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I didn't go very far in that story, but just an example.
I don't think you need to go further. I think, yeah, I don't want to hear it. So
yeah.
So how did everyone around you react to your these drastic changes in your life?
Most people, I'd say people fell into one of 3 or 4 groups, right? So one was the people that decided I was too self-righteous and wanted nothing else to do with me. One was the people who maybe they didn't hate me or anything, but now that we didn't drink together, we really had nothing in common. Then there was the group of people that maybe we actually liked each other. We actually did have things in common, but drinking was such a key aspect of their lifestyle that it was impossible for us to hang out, because hanging out to them meant drinking. Mm-hmm. And then there was a small portion of people who, I guess maybe there was a small portion who were supportive, and then there was a small portion who stayed my friends over time but weren't really supportive and thought it was stupid. That's okay, because they went their way and I went mine, and some of them I still know, and they're okay people. They just still don't think straight edge makes sense or veganism makes sense or whatever. But you know, sometimes you hold on to those relationships from way back.
Yeah. You know what my favorite straight edge joke is?
No, I don't think I do.
How many straight edge kids does it take to change a light bulb? None. Straight edge can't change shit.
Oh yeah, I think I heard that first as a feminist joke.
I've heard it in so many ways.
Yeah,
and I love it. Being, you know, someone who is straight edge and my entire life, I love it. If you can't laugh at yourself, then whatever.
Yeah.
So, what's your go-to vegan meal?
Well, right now, I've changed a lot in the last year in that I'm trying to get into weightlifting and bodybuilding pretty serious. Mm-hmm. And I'm still pretty tiny, so it's funny for me to say that, but I've put on about 15 pounds in the last year. So these days I'm eating a lot of peanut butter on toast and vegan smoothies with vegan proteins plus protein powder in it and stuff like that, and a lot of stir fries.
What do you usually have in your stir fry?
I think I would go with onions, garlic, red peppers, kale, sometimes tofu, and lots of spices.
Sounds good.
Trying to think what else. Yeah.
So
Whatever else I have.
How is the
Sorry?
vegan scene around you?
Lame. Let's just be straight up. I live in Victoria, BC, which there's 2 or 3 conflicts here. One is that you've got a lot of the kind of... When people use the term anarcho-primitivist, they're using it to refer to 2 different communities that aren't really the same. I'm kind of anarcho-primitivist in the way of John Zerzan and Layla Abdel-Rahim, but there's a lot of these other people that are kind of the primitivists in the way of skinning their dog behind their house and eating it, kind. And that's really popular out here. A lot of people really into hunting and fishing and Systema and that lifestyle, right? So that's one of the conflicts. And then the other conflict in this area is that the Vancouver has a really neat thing going on as far as animal rights. Victoria has been heavily dominated by a group called Friends of Animals, which has been up until recently run by a guy named Dave Shishkoff. And he used to work for PETA. FOA, if you want to go back in history a bit, FOA in the 90s was a group that helped the FBI against Rod Coronado. They're a complete liberal, in the system, Gary Francione cult type group. Lee Hall is the main person running it, I believe. And so everything with them, like you'd get their newsletter, and every newsletter, it was called the Victoria Vegan, was just article after article bashing other animal rights groups for not being pacifists enough or stuff like that. Bashing groups as broad as vegan outreach even, you know. Dave's actually organized protests against PETA. And it's just super dominated by that kind of thing. And then the only other group in town is a group at UVic, which is basically another Gary Francione cult. So there hasn't been much going on in Victoria. There's now starting to get some people out here that have a bit more thought in the direction that I'm interested in. But I generally put most of my energy instead into the anarchist side of my politics, because there is a thriving anarchist community here. And since I've moved here in 2005, the work I've done has been largely on trying to build an infrastructure to an anarchist community here.
So you were saying that you lean more towards primitivism. Can you explain what that means to you? Because I've talked to so many different people and I get so many different answers.
Sure. Well, I'd say I'm most on board with the writing of Layla Abdel-Rahim. She wrote Wild Children, Domesticated Dreams, and she's working on her 2nd book right now. I'm friends with John Zerzan. I highly respect that guy. He's been one of the best people I've met throughout my life. A huge amount of props to him. To me, anarcho-primitivism is a idea within green anarchy that essentially says, number one, that all the things that we talk about as anarchists is things we want. Voluntary association, community based on cooperation, all these things already exist. They exist within how many tribal or indigenous people around the world have lived for thousands of years, and many continue to live, and they're likely how our ancestors lived according to anthropological data as well, for those of us who are settlers. So within that, anarcho-primitivism to me also has specific critiques that it's brought out that other strains of thought maybe share, but primitivism really kind of centered on them. And one of those is the critique of domestication, which is why I see a big connection to animal liberation thought. And I'm not the first to point at that. The anarcho-primitivists sort of say that domestication of any domestication, animals, plants, that it has a psychological effect on us that's damaging, that it leads to all kinds of institutions of hierarchy, that it leads to a sedentary lifestyle, which has its own problems related to it. Even mainstream anthropologists at this point will admit that, or will state that patriarchy rose when people moved from gather-hunter or gather-type lifestyles into sedentary lifestyles and began farming. So anarcho-primitivism looks at those kinds of critiques and those bigger questions. One of the other aspects that's unique to it is that within leftist thought and left anarchism, there was this tradition at the time when all this began, and you can see this clearly in the early writings, or in the writings of Freddie Perlman and others like him, that there was certain questions that were considered off the table, and so only people like Freddie Perlman would start asking these questions, and you weren't allowed to ask these questions. They were kind of like the left was an institution. It wasn't supposed to be criticized. And to criticize it was to align yourself with the reactionaries. So anarcho-primitivism, one of the things about it was that it started to criticize these things, to look at the questions and assume no question is off the table. That's where it leads into things like John Zerzan famously arguing that language, maybe we have to look at whether or not language is a tool that's used or has helped to domesticate and to lead to all the hierarchy. And of course, when he says language, he's not referring to any type of speech and communication. He's referring to an imposed grammar upon how we communicate. But those kinds of questions, again, that's to me what anarcho-primitivism is, as well as, of course, the critique of technology, the critique of civilization. Civilization being very centered in domestication. Like, it's a way of living where we domesticate those around us and turn them into resources. To quote Layla Abdelrahim, she says, resources have to be constantly taught and reminded that they are resources, for in the wild they would not know pain or toil, and they would easily turn feral if not continuously reminded. So that's kind of, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, a lot of that is something that I've always felt very close to with my own beliefs, but some of the critiques that I have a really hard time getting behind, like you talked about Zerzan with language, but also his critique on time and art, they make it's really hard for me to grasp or get behind, if that makes sense.
Sure. And honestly, I'm going to say straight out, I love Zerzan. I don't agree with everything he says. And I think that's good. And I think he knows that. When we get together, we hang out once in a while. When I'm in Eugene or he's out here, we disagree for hours. That's kind of how we hang out. And he's the best person in the world to disagree with, because he doesn't really care if you agree with him. He'll sit. So that's, that's a lot different than a lot of other writers that you disagree with them and they'll just cut you off permanently. John doesn't care. So as far as things like time, though, and symbolic thought, and I think he's got some interesting points there, and that doesn't mean he's right, but it means there's things to consider in that. There's things that are complex that we need to be thinking through, and I'm going to share a short story here. I had him out here a few years back. I set up a debate between him and a social ecologist named Matt Hearn, who wrote a book called Common Ground in a Liquid City in Defense of an Urban Future.
We've had him on.
Debate. What's that?
We interviewed him.
Oh yeah, Matt's a great guy too. So I brought them together and had them have this kind of public debate discussion thing. And afterwards, I have a good friend who is very, very in love with art. She's huge in the art scene. She's now the minister of a local artist-run collective. And I brought her over to John and I introduced them. And I said, hey, John, this is my friend Katie. I sent her that article of yours on the case against art. She photographs art for the Victoria Museum and blah, blah, blah. And he laughed and he said, oh, actually, I really love art. And then I kind of walked away as they spent the next hour talking about how much they loved art and all the different art they're into.
Huh.
So, he's looking at the deep questions, but that doesn't mean because he's against technology, he's never going to use it, or because we got to be realistic. We live in a world that's not the world of our ideals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do we make a world of our ideals?
I think if I knew the answer to that question, I'd be doing more than just being interviewed on your podcast. But there's obviously some people who are doing good in that direction. Like, you look at the history and life of Rod Coronado, and there's a guy who has tried very hard to live his ideals. Look at the Una Stolten, which is a clan of the Wet'suwet'en who are up in northern BC, and they're currently building pit houses in the way of the pipelines and protecting the rivers. There's another example of people that are trying to live their ideals, and you can find these examples everywhere all through our history. Even in Christian communities you can find them. You look at Weibo Ludwig. There's a great documentary called Weibo's War about him blowing up gas pipelines, and it's an awesome documentary. I highly recommend it. And he's so Christian. He's this minister of this Christian intentional community, and even there's people trying to live their ideals, trying to make them real. So I think that there's lots of people that probably could answer the question better than me. I live in a city surrounded by people that hate vegans, and I'm talking to you on Skype right now about why technology is problematic.
So, the common thing people say is like, if you don't like where you're living, why don't you move? Well, why don't you move?
If they want to pay for that whole thing, maybe. But, for one, I put down roots here. To me, it's like, if you don't like where you live, you change where you live. That doesn't mean you move away from it. You change the situation. I put down roots in this community. This is where I live. This is who I am. I think actually one of the biggest problems stopping change is people not putting down roots where they are and taking that kind of a stand and saying, this is my home. At the same time, got to be careful with that, because I am somewhat of Scottish descent. I am a settler, part of the settler colonialism. I'm living on stolen native land. This land where I live is unceded. And I feel like when we put down roots and take a stand, we got to be careful that we're not saying to the native people, well, screw it. We don't care that your land was stolen. Because in reality, we need to at least be willing to consider the option of leaving in order to ever get out of that settler problem. That doesn't mean we all go back to Europe. It means that there's a few hundred different indigenous nations across North America. And if we're not welcome in one, maybe we got to do the work to be welcome in another one. But that's its whole own question. I'm trying to think what you would ask me.
About settling roots. So how does settling roots, conflict with the idea of the domestication? Isn't the idea of settling in of itself, in contradiction?
I don't think so at all. I think if you look at how animals live, pretty much every animal has its roots within the place that it's birthed out of, right? And you could talk about that in spiritual language and say they're made of that land and have a relationship to it. Or you could talk about it in a scientific, biological language, or you could talk about it in whatever. But you got these things that are true in this sense, and that is that these animals live within a place. Even if that place is a large place, there's a mythology that humans at one time just wandered the earth. There's a mythology that animals or birds just wander. But anyone who knows anything about science at all knows that people wander within circuits, or animals wander within circuits. They move within place. They don't just go anywhere. They go the same place they've gone for 100 years. I remember this is not a very vegan example, but I remember a indigenous guy, I think he was, what's the nation, Wasanak, who I went on a plant walk with, and he was talking about all the different plants. And how this one's an indicator species of this, and this one's a food, and this one's a medicine, and so on. And most of them were 3 or 4 things. But this one, I remember him telling us that when this tree flowered, it meant that this was the time that we had to go up to this part of the island to catch cod, because that was the only time we left our territories, was to catch cod during that one period of the year. And the flowers told them when to go. That's the kind of intimate knowledge of the land that I think that many of us would like to get back to at some point.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt.
Yeah, so that's not wandering, though. Wandering is, in my opinion, a modern phenomenon. Wandering comes when people who have historic roots within a place have been displaced. And so you don't feel like you belong anywhere, so you just go somewhere that's somewhere else.
You go almost in search of that place because it doesn't exist. Yeah. Okay.
Mine DeLorean Jr. said something like that once, actually, about how settler people often they don't live with the land long enough to know its cycles, so they're always in search of new identities and new beliefs and new something because they're trying to find something that they don't have.
I can totally relate to that.
See, the problem with me is I have super green roots for sure, but I also really enjoy technology, and I think that it has a viable place in society, personally. But I'm also
I just have a hard time with the definition of technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that most people are unclear what's meant by technology, too. Because, I know I have this book on my shelf that I've been staring at for a year and I haven't read yet because I'm intimidated by it. But it's one of the earlier Green Anarchist books, and it's called The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. Ellul is this French theologian with a history doctorate who very interesting guy to read. He was Christian, but he also was this anti-technology theorist. And I know that part of his view is that technology is not machines. Technology is methodologies. So, for example, the assembly line, there's no machine there. I do this part of the job, you do that part, you do that part, and then we have a finished product, and there's no craftsmanship in it at all, and everyone looks the same. And they're all made in this really efficient way because, as he puts it, technology, we often think that technology is going to make our lives easier and quicker and so on, but it never does, because what happens instead is that we end up having to change to learn the needs of the technology because efficiency demands us to know it.
So by that, would his definition of technology isn't, improvements in society, like, a plow wouldn't be technology because you're creating that to solve a problem. It's when you use it the other way around. Is that what? Am I grasping that correctly?
No, a plow is definitely also technology, but he doesn't just talk about technology. He talks about technique, and technique is the ways that we do things. And he critiques right into that. And again, I haven't read the whole book yet because I've been intimidated by it since I've read other stuff by him and been like, what the hell is going on here? I tried to read one of his books on Christianity and got lost the first chapter in. I'm not a Christian, but it was like, holy shit, I've never read something like this.
So like my problem is with the what do you find technology is shaping 2 rocks together. Would that be technology? Would be, shaping naturally formed glass. Would that be considered technology? Do you know what I mean? Like, at what point is there technology?
I think that I have trouble answering that question myself. I feel like it's one of those things. There's things where you know what they are, but to describe them to someone. I was once doing a series of workshops, and someone asked me, because I used the term patriarchy, they said, okay, what's patriarchy? And I was like, well, And then I struggled to define it. I knew what I meant, but I couldn't. So I went and looked it up, and I ended up coming up with a definition after thinking about it for 3 days. But having never been asked that directly, it was kind of this hard thing where all I could do was give examples. So I feel like technology is the same, or love, or many of these ideas are things where we all know what they mean to a degree, but we never sit down and define what they mean to us. It's hard to say where technology begins, because crows go and they build tools to collect bugs to eat. Like, that's amazing. These animals do this. Many animals actually do things like that.
Yeah.
When I went to a workshop by some Squequamic people of Nesconolith. They showed us how traditional teepees were built when they were traveling. And it was built using cedar bark as the outside. It was amazing. Like, is that technology? Well, maybe, but that's not really what people like John Zerzan and Layla Abdelrahim and even Kevin Tucker or myself, that's not what we're talking about. So we can go that far if you want to think about that stuff. It's always good to think about, but I think the people criticizing technology aren't really talking about that. I don't know if that answers you, though.
No, because, I mean, it's just, that's always been my biggest struggle with primitivism is, there's no clearly defined, and I'm one who likes things clearly defined.
Yeah, well, I'd also say that I specifically would say I'm a green anarchist. I like the fluidity of that label. I am not quite anarcho-primitivist, but I take a lot from primitivism. I don't think you can be a green anarchist without considering primitivism in a serious way, because the questions they're asking are important. So I work with a lot of primitivists. I'm actually more of a green anarchist in a broader sense than that. I call myself a big tent anarchist, by which I mean that while I might have my personal views on leftism or domestication or so on, and that's the stuff I'm interested in and engaging with, when it comes to my activism and organizing in the community, I do so in an approach that's non-sectarian. So I help organize the Anarchist Book Fair. We don't say, oh, no, you're a leftist, you can't come in. We say, sure, what would it take for you to be here? Because we want the people at the Antifa table and the people at the IWW table and the people doing these projects that personally I might find some of them interesting and I might find some of them boring. But we want them there at the same time as we want people like John Zerzan there and indigenous sovereigntists who might not call themselves anarchists. We want them there. And animal lib people we want there. And then the people who come into that space, who come to the workshops, who talk to the tablers and buy materials, they're going to find what they're looking for, not what we think they should read. And it comes with this trust that people know what they believe and what's right for them.
I was just going to say, I noticed you didn't mention ANCAPs.
Well, that's what I was going to say, too. I was like...
Oh, no. They're not anarchists, though, right?
Yeah, I know.
I think all the anarchists get along, except for ANCAPs, because they're not anarchists.
I'm fairly on board with you. I also think the platformists sometimes don't get along with anyone because they think everything we're doing isn't anarchism. But they can think that over in their own bubble by themselves somewhere where nobody ever hears about them, right? Like,
I really hate putting a label to my anarchism because I don't feel like I know enough about any specific, train of thought to actually like really be a part of it. So usually I'll just, if I have to classify, it's either just syndicalist or green syndicalist. But then again, I don't even feel comfortable saying that half the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It can be hard because sometimes, too, like, I know years ago I used to call myself a syndicalist, and then I had a whole pile of really bad experiences with a series of syndicalists to the point where I wanted nothing to do with the IWW or anyone who is calling themselves a syndicalist. And they were all, like, super pro-technology and really into drinking and drugs, and I just could not deal with them at all. And then I ended up meeting people like Jeff Shantz, who wrote the book Green Syndicalism. I mean, he is such a wonderful human being. And I have a few friends here and there who are members of IWW. And, we might not agree on some of the big long-term questions. Like, I want a world where factories don't exist. They want a world of self-managed factories. But in the meantime, there's stuff going on right now that we can work together on. Or maybe we don't have to work together. They can do their work, I'll do my work, and we don't have to undermine each other.
You mentioned a name that I haven't heard for years, which is Kevin Tucker, and he was corresponding with me when I was in jail, 14 years ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really struck out with me and started getting me away from primitivism was that he was telling me that he stopped being vegan because of primitivism. And I don't know anything about him now, mm-hmm. but those correspondence really made me think, well, is veganism not part of primitivism? And I'm not saying it is. I was just saying that was one of the trains of thoughts, more than a decade ago.
Yeah, sure, and it still is. Like Kevin Tucker, I see him on Facebook as I follow his publishing mm-hmm. on Facebook. He's got a black and green press page, and I agree with some of the stuff he says. I totally think other stuff is complete garbage, and he spends way too much time and energy attacking vegans. And I don't get why, because it's really, veganism is these people that are trying to do something different. They're trying to be better, and it might not be successful, or it might not always reach our goals. But that just means we have more work to do. Why attack this? It's like Lear Keith and Derek Jensen and all those knobs. They all they constantly want to attack veganism for some reason. I don't understand why they're putting so much energy into attacking others within the community who are trying to do something. And meanwhile, talking about horizontal hostility, get over yourselves, right? Kevin is someone who I probably would never personally work with. I appreciate some of his publishing. Mm-hmm. That's about as far as that goes. And occasionally, as I said, he does write some things now and then where I'm like, hey, that's right on. But there are people that I'm a little more inclined towards. I used to do a lot of work with Walter Bond. I don't quite agree with him these days. I am a huge fan of Layla Abdelrahim. I think she's, especially for those interested in veganism and anarcho-primitivism, she is exactly that synthesis with her writing. She is also very challenging and engaging, yet her book's 120 pages.
She's one I know the name, but I've never actually read.
She wrote a book which is centered on the question of education and whether or not education, she posits that education is itself a type of violence, that it's attempting to domesticate children and teach them that they are resources, that we can't fix the education system because the education system itself, the very concept of education, is the problem. She homeschooled her daughter. She originally grew up in Sudan and Russia. She grew up largely on the savannah. She didn't go to school much growing up. She has a PhD now, but she did that largely so that she could stay in one place long enough to take care of her daughter the way her daughter deserved. And she has a partner named Sasha. I'm not even going to attempt to butcher his last name by trying to say it out loud. It's Russian. But Sasha is also an amazing theorist, and he's done a lot of work on the effects of technology on people, such as using Facebook all day kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And he's also doing some work around the question of how people within white-collar, heavily surveilled kind of office spaces and stuff get away with slacking at work. So he's an interesting guy, too. They're both quite interesting, and I highly respect them a lot.
As someone who works in an office in a white-collar environment, there is unbelievable amount of slacking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I also find that a lot of where I take direction from, too, and of course there's people like Rob Coronado, who I think everything he's done and said over the years applies to us, even if he doesn't call himself a vegan or doesn't call himself an anarcho-primitivist or whatever. Mm-hmm. All of his work applies. But I think that a lot of the places I also take direction from aren't from anarchists. They're from indigenous people. And those indigenous people might eat fish. They might hunt. But they have a lot of things that we can learn from them, even if we are vegan. And I don't see, like, I'm going to throw another name out there. There's a guy named Dylan Powell who lives in Niagara, Ontario. He's a wonderful human being, does marine land animal defense. And he recently wrote a great piece called Veganism in the Occupied Territories. I don't see why some people seem to think that there has to be some kind of a clash of culture between vegans and indigenous people. I personally haven't had that clash. I stayed with a guy a while back who was the traditional chief of a nation around Vancouver. He put me up for the night just because a friend said that I needed a place. And I went to stay with him, and he lived in an apartment building in the city. I walked in, he said, "Are you hungry?" I said, "Well, I'm a little hungry, but not too bad." He said, "I got some buffalo stew on." I said, "That's okay, I don't eat buffalo." He's like, "Why not? It's wild, it's caught." I said, "Well, that's okay, I'm fine with that, but I don't do that. I just don't eat meat at all." He's like, "Oh, okay, do you want some almonds?" There was no problem there. Mm-hmm. So the idea that there has to be a problem between animal lib people and indigenous people, I think is largely in people's heads and in the books of idiots like Lear Keith.
It's when you mentioned that, the first thing I thought of was the recent attacks on the indigenous sill hunts with their Silphy camp thing they did.
I think I heard something on the radio about that. I don't feel like I know a lot about it. I do know that, again, Dylan Powell wrote a piece a few years back on the false opposition to the fur, stopping the fur trade. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how industry and government often try to create barriers between activists and indigenous communities. And how, a few people have written on this, how the fur trade, something like 5% of the all sealing, or less than 5%, actually is done by indigenous people. The other 95% is done by non-indigenous people. So the idea that we're harming indigenous people by trying to stop the fur trade is largely a mythology.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought stopping the fur trade in Canada was nothing to do with the indigenous hunts. It was all just the corporate hunts, basically.
Yeah.
And there's indigenous protection, right?
Sorry?
There's indigenous protection as well, right? For example, there's areas where sea turtles can be hunted and eaten by indigenous people because it's a cultural thing, where it would be illegal in the territory, like that.
Like if I went to the territory.
Like if you went there, yeah.
Yeah, to a small degree, there is that. To a large degree, there's things that are promised within the treaties that the Crown wrote between the government of Canada and these indigenous nations, and they're never lived up to. And they always find some way to undermine it. One of the current ways is conservation. So they'll say, well, no, you can't go and fish because we need to conserve the fish stocks. And then the next year there's a huge fish run. And they'll open the fisheries to the commercial farmers first and then tell the indigenous people, no, we have to be conservative. You can't fish. And so there's, in writing, there's things that say that indigenous people can hunt in certain areas and stuff. And whenever it goes to court, the courts often rule somewhat racist, but often that, they were right. They had a right to fish there. But, that means you're going to court for 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And laws never...
Laws aren't the answer.
Yeah, laws aren't the answer, for sure.
Yeah. Mel Basil from Wet'suwet'en and Giksan, he's an indigenous anarchist, and he gave a talk once at our anarchist book fair against the idea of rights. He doesn't believe we have rights. He believes we have responsibilities. And within that, he also said that he is an anarchist in that he doesn't believe that in law. He thinks the only laws are the natural laws, the traditional laws given to the people by the land, and they're not written.
Mm-hmm.
So he just doesn't recognize the state. I heard Rod Coronado say something similar too.
I wish I could get my mindset to that point. Like, honestly.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to get over, for sure.
Yeah.
You said you did a little bit of work with Walter Bond, but you've distanced from that as well?
Yeah. I don't want to discourage anyone from supporting Walter. He's in prison for the next 10 years. He needs support. We had a disagreement over some stuff related to a very prominent animal rights activist I won't name, who Walter's friends with, who I can't stand. And then after that, he just wrote all of the anarchists out. He just cut us all off from communication, and started writing against anarchists again, which is this weird kind of turnaround. But I still feel like he deserves to be supported because he's a prisoner.
He's definitely had, I think, a little bit of hard of a time.
It seems like he's had a pendulum of thought going through since he's been incarcerated. Like, it seems like he's been on a continual changing path through his ideologies. Maybe that's incorrect, because I don't follow him too closely.
Yeah, and I think some of it, I don't know. It's hard for me to say because, I feel like from what I've seen, sometimes he's a little self-sabotaging. Mm-hmm. I think he has trouble with the idea that people like or respect him or want to help him because he's not used to that. If you read much about how he grew up or if you've talked to him much, he grew up in alcoholic families. He grew up with a brother who was a crystal meth addict. He grew up kind of hated his whole life. It's hard for people to come from those kind of backgrounds to actually accept help.
Yeah.
To actually.
I'm
and
really
his whole identity is the lone wolf. Sorry?
Yeah,
exactly.
I was just saying, I'm really interested to know, what the conflict was that brought you away, but you said you didn't want to talk about it, but that's cool.
That's fine.
Yeah. But my curiosity is just, ooh, dirt. I want it.
Yeah, I'm just not a big fan of spending too much of my time and energy putting down others. There are some, I'll put down Liarchy, no problem. But for the most part, I'd rather, even someone like Kevin Tucker, who I disagree with a lot, I think he's also got a lot of value. And I'm not going to spend my time putting him down. I'll spend my time and my energy putting people up that I respect or putting on my own stuff.
That's been my belief is that pessimism doesn't create anything positive. Mm-hmm. It only creates negativity. So if you spend your time focusing on pessimism, you're just going to create negativity in your own life.
Yeah, I think that's at least somewhat true. You watch the trajectory of Derek Jensen over the last number of years, and I think he's a living example of that. That guy has come from a point of being the guy everyone wanted to see and hear and read to being the guy that everyone despises. And the more he lashes out, the more people hate him.
Well, I got to be honest, I was always on the despise end.
I had a hard time with him just because, I respected a lot of things that he said, but then I felt he was very defensive, almost to a point of guilt about veganism. If you know, in What We Leave Behind, he just kind of went on a rant about how he has Crohn's disease and how he only eats. He's just trying to defend the fact that he's not vegan, and that kind of just rubbed me the wrong way. Is why are you defending it so hard? Just don't even mention it.
I'm kind of on that board too, right? I don't care if someone's vegan or not. I might have my own opinions on it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to make someone be vegan for me to support them. However, when people start trying to find every reason and rationale and excuse and constantly attack it, there's a point where there's something wrong there.
Yeah, for sure.
And what did me over with them, obviously, is that they spew hate and they're transphobic. And I just can't stand with that. And so...
Yeah.
that ultimately led me to the position I take with them.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it was for me originally, too. And I feel bad in a way because, I think a lot of people dismissed John Zerzan for a lot of years because Derek Jensen shit-talked him.
Mm-hmm.
And Derek Jensen's traveled around shit-talking John Zerzan and shit-talking Ward Churchill and all these people, and maybe they're not good people, maybe they are good people, but he has, it's like John can put him down every week on his radio show for 2 years and reach maybe 75 or 200 people. Derek goes and does a talk for 500 people. So, the impact of that's pretty intense. And when you actually look at it, the first people to criticize Jensen were the Anarchist-Primitivists. It was Kevin Tucker, and it was John Zerzan, and it was that crowd of people that started saying, hey, this guy's a megalomaniac. Hey, this guy burned us.
Mm-hmm.
And then nobody listened to them. And I feel bad that I didn't listen to them because I invested time and energy into knowing Jensen at one point and his kind of cadre. And I got pretty badly burned. I've been attacked a number of times over the internet by some DGR idiots. I actually, a while back, my main issue, too, was the transphobia thing. And I knew about the transphobia from Lier way before it was a really public thing. Because I have a lot of friends in the trans community. And it was brought forward to me. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, there was lots on it. And then a few years later, it was the big thing. But when it comes to the whole transphobia thing, I think you need to look back into where she comes from, too. Because before she was this person in DGR, she was the editor of On Our Backs magazine, which was a transphobic rad fem journal. She was an organizer of Michigan Women's Music Festival, which has lots of transphobic policies. She's got this long history coming from there. She constantly recommends the writings of Janice Raymond and Mary Daly, who are probably about as close as you can find to where this whole transphobic bigotry starts within radical feminism.
Man, sorry, you just got me thinking about how much I hate it. Like it was such a discussion for us. We had a rendezvous last year that we were holding. And it was, what do we do if someone from DGR shows up? Do we actually be like, get the fuck out? Or do we, want to create the space? Because I don't want that space of hate,
I come from the point where I have no problem publicly shaming someone. Is that terrible?
I don't know. I think sometimes it doesn't help. That's my only thing.
We've had a lot of people ask us to get, try to get some of them on the podcast to try to confront them on the issues. But we're under the aspect of there's nothing positive will come of it. Like neither one of us are going to change our opinions. It's just going to be a hate fest between each other, yelling and.
And that's why I wouldn't have a problem with asking someone to leave, because I don't think there's any positivity to come from it. But it really sucks here. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say that I agree with asking someone to leave is a different thing to me, though. I feel like, there's times you have to kick people out. We kicked out some people from our anarchist book fair last year because they were part of this right-wing conspiracy group called We Are Change, and they had actually harassed one of the people who was tabling at the book fair. So we told them to leave, right? Like, that happens sometimes. You have to ask people to leave. But I think there's also a difference between asking people to leave and then go out and trying to engage people, such as if you phoned up Leah Keith and asked her for an interview. That would be a whole different scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was
you were going to say something.
Sorry, what was that?
You were going to say something, though.
Yeah, it was just really challenging for us because there's a local DGR person here, probably one of one, and
one of one,
and they've done actually a lot of great work connecting with Indigenous people regarding like tar sands and stuff like that. And it's like, how do you continue those connections yet distance yourself from that person's ideologies? And that's the difficult thing, because there's a lot of overlap, and it's just hard.
I think we're in the same scenario here where I live. Where is it that you're at?
I'm in
Sorry?
Utah.
Okay, home of the Mormons.
Yeah.
Here we have one of the main people who is an environmental organizer in BC is a DGR person. And she sometimes works under the banner of DGR, but these days she mostly doesn't. She's never distanced herself from the group. She just doesn't do her work under their banner. And she has done enormous work for 20-some years around environmental stuff in BC, and she's done enormous work in specific with connecting with Indigenous communities in BC, and a lot of the stuff with the Unistolton resistance, they were supported by DGR because of this person. So we have a similar problem here because this is also someone who is a well-known feminist and anarchist. They call themselves anarchists, believe it or not. Derek Jensen probably wouldn't be happy on that, but they're part of our community, and so we have to navigate that situation too, because we don't want to exclude them from the community because they do important work that needs to be done that nobody else is doing, and that's the key factor. No one else is doing it. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we're always kind of worried that this DGR stuff's going to come up if they're at an event or whatever. I mostly deal with it by that I blocked her off Facebook and I just don't talk to her.
And that works great as a personal one-on-one setting. And like we went into the whole organizing aspect, at least this is my mindset was, if they're coming to our event, that's fine as long as they don't bring that baggage. If that makes sense. Yeah. And that's
same thing we did. Like with the book fair, they table at the book fair, but they don't bring DGR materials.
Yeah, exactly. Like if they start, bringing up the ideology and they start bringing up these things, then, you can challenge and then or remove. But,
I think the harder problem comes with someone who wants to create that conversation. Mm-hmm. So, like, say that you have a book fair and this person's at the book fair and someone comes up to them with an agenda and they want to make the DGR stuff and transphobia specifically and veganism specifically and whatever issue you want to bring up. They want to make that their issue. And so they want to create a conversation. And the person tabling, who's your token DGR person who's not tabling as part of DGR, because many of us wear many hats, they don't want to have that conversation. Then what do you do?
I'm kind of under the mindset, if you don't want to have that conversation, you shouldn't be there.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would definitely never defend DGR, just to be clear on this, right?
No, I mean, but these are complex issues because we deal with so many people who have similar ideologies, but at the same time, in other aspects, completely opposite. Mm-hmm. And, it's like communists working with anarchists. There's another debate we always have. I'm always on the side of they're going to fucking kill us one day. Like, just know that. They're gunning for us. They're not our friend. But I know other people feel differently.
Well, we also had one a few years back where I also volunteered at Anti-Colonial Bookstore here. And we had one a few years back where a group calling themselves the Student Christian Movement wanted to use the space. And I won't get into any of the internal stuff because the collective has a right to decide what's internal and what's not and all that. But the gist of it was that this group wanted to use the space, and they were a radical Christian university student group. And some people were very vehemently against this idea. To them, Christians were the same as politicians and so on. And other people thought that was ridiculous, and it was a big tension for a while. And one of the factors that really influenced it was that the people that made up this student Christian group were a lot of the main transgender activists in town. So, because we all wear different hats,
Yeah.
I'm an anarchist book fair organizer. I'm also a member of Camus Books Collective. I'm also a writer for Profane Existence, right? So here we had this group of transgender activists who were also Christians. And nobody had a problem with letting them use the space as a transgender group.
Yeah, it creates lots of problems. It really does. But
I'm
sorry.
I'm just interested in how, I guess that's just me asserting my thoughts, but like how accepting Christians can be of transgender community in the first place.
I think it depends which Christians you're talking about and how you define.
And in a conundrum like that, which I'm sure that was brought up in the collective itself, was, is it that it's religious or is that it's Christian? Because if it was a Buddhist organization, would you have, just as many opposing views to it?
Yeah, and that definitely was. And also, like, as far as radical Christians, again, I'm not a Christian, but I read some stuff by radical Christians, and learning that history is engaging. There's some really important stuff, and I think we do ourselves a disservice when we choose to just outright ignore it and write it off without even thinking about it, and not learn that stuff. But there is groups like the Jesus Radicals. You can go to the Jesus Radicals website. They have this hilarious logo of a raised fist with the stigmata hole. But they have some really awesome work there. I heard an extensive interview with Ashanti Alston, former Black Panther, who I've worked with a few times. They had one article I came across a few years back that had two women interviewing each other. One was a Catholic who hunted as part of her belief in Christianity. She was a hunter. The other was a Protestant woman, I think evangelical, who was vegan as part of her Christianity. And they were kind of interviewing each other back and forth, asking these challenging questions about what they believed in a respectful way. I've never come across that anywhere else. So as much as I'm not a Christian, I'll read the stuff of Jacques Ellul and Ammon Hennessy and Jesus Radicals, because there's some really good work being done there.
So you say you're not Christian. Are you religious at all?
I grew up Christian. I was atheist for a lot of years until I realized that it was more dogmatic than Christianity. That'll probably offend a couple of your listeners. I have more tolerance these days for Christians than I do for atheists. I am spiritual, but not in a formal religious sense. I kind of believe I came to a point where I started to recognize that even though I'd never tried to be religious or spiritual, that many of my beliefs were. So when I start believing in things like interspecies communication, or when I started believing that the whole world is alive, and a lot of that came too from reading the writings of Indigenous people. I'm not trying to culturally appropriate anything here, but the base message that the world is alive. We live in a living world of magic, right? Like that kind of a way of thinking about where you live. And then straight edge becomes part of that, because being straight edge is about not numbing yourself and being connected to the world around you. Or being vegan is part of that, because being vegan is about keeping the animals in your mind and with you when you're making your choices of what to eat and so on. These things, there is a spiritual component to them. So yeah, I would say I'm spiritual. I'm not religious. And I'm careful of saying, though, because sometimes when people say they're spiritual, it's kind of this cop-out too, where it just means that essentially they want to have the good parts of the religion, but they don't want to do the work to actually be part of a community. So
it's funny because how you described yourself is exactly how I feel, because I feel the same way, but I have no spiritual belief behind it. I just have an awe and respect for everything, and I feel like I just don't have enough answers. So I mean, that's why I call myself an atheist, but I still have an awe, and I still believe the world's living, and I still believe there's so much more that we don't understand. I just don't believe there was a God
or gods.
Yeah,
or gods, I should say. Yeah.
Well, that's another part. Just to clarify, I am non-theistic. So I don't believe in a God. I don't believe in a soul. I don't believe in afterlife. And I don't believe in multiple gods. I'm actually, Sasha, who was Layla Abdel-Rahim's partner, actually pointed out something to me, and it's really been on my mind since. This was that a lot of pagan religions, like paganism is this hot thing right now, right? Like everyone's supposed to go back to being pagan and be, you know, but it's really problematic because a lot of those pagan religions are polytheistic religions, and many of them actually have patriarchal war gods. Mm-hmm. And we talk about it like they're all like these beautiful earth-based goddess religions, and we only talk about the goddesses, but the patriarchal war gods were central to them. And even having goddesses, those are nature-based goddesses, but they're not. They're more agricultural-based goddesses. So they're goddesses of fertility in the land in that way. And the practice is to worship them in order to control having a good harvest. So you're right back to trying to control nature.
So that's really making a comeback? I haven't heard this, like, paganism as a comeback.
I've noticed it. I've seen it a lot, both in a way of things like Asatru, where people are trying to go back to the old religions, but also in the way of sort of neo-paganism, which neo-paganism is a lot of this like Starhawk type earth-based goddess worship stuff, and a lot of that's a little different because it doesn't have the patriarchal war gods, but it's often based off of trying to create a new mythology out of some of those old mythologies, and it still ends up being based on control of nature in a lot of ways. In this subtle way where they don't realize they're trying to do that. But
I feel like so many of those, like Odinism and so many things just have that to them. If you know what I'm saying. The
control of nature?
Yeah, like in the patriarchal war god kind of things. Maybe I'm mistaken, but...
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm referring to. So I'm non-theistic. I don't believe in a god of any type. I believe in the concept of creation, and you can call that God if you want. Sometimes when I write my poetry, I use biblical Christian language because it's fun to play with and to, sort of I understand it enough that I can use it in that way where I can repurpose it. That's the term. I don't have a problem with the idea of God, depending what you mean by God. If you mean God's a white guy floating in the cloud deciding when there will be tornadoes, yeah, I got a problem with God. So it's all kind of based on perspective. I don't know a lot about Judaism, but one thing I do know from there that I find interesting is this concept that they have that God is never fully knowable. And it's this mystical concept that you can't totally know God, but you're supposed to quest to know God. And, even though I don't believe in a deity, I kind of find there's something interesting about that concept. I think a lot of atheists who describe themselves in the way you are, that the world's a lot bigger and there's a lot we don't know out there, could relate to that concept even.
Oh, yeah, completely. I think my whole existence is about, confronting that awe and keep learning as much as I can and that personal journey.
Yeah. For me, the big thing is I started to realize at some point that most people used atheist to mean synonymous with sort of worship of science and scientific materialism. And I started reading critiques of science, and I think science is itself super problematic and has all the problems that I used to see in monotheism.
I don't disagree with you, but from my perspective, I think most people in the science community itself question the science community itself enough, but I'm not really in that community, so.
But do they question it from outside, or do they question it from within? By which I mean it's like the whole system where you put in a complaint to the police and the police investigate the police.
I don't know. I kind of think that sometimes if a scientist makes a claim that is really out there, I think the science community as a whole will really be aggressive towards that claim, even if that claim is accurate.
Some, yeah, totally.
But maybe not necessarily all the time.
I'm not a scientist. I hate talking like I'm in that community.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah,
I'm just a layman.
Well, that's actually touching exactly on where my problem is with it when you say layman, because to me, science comes out of the history of monotheism. And back in the days of monotheism, only the priest could interpret the word of God. And now we have and then it became that only the priest could read. So, like they could be the only ones who could interpret the word of God in that sense too, right? Now we have a society where most people just believe the science they want to believe and don't believe the science they don't, because honestly, they have no clue where to even begin looking into the research, never mind doing the studies themselves. It's a similar kind of hierarchy where we have such specialized skill that most people it's just not accessible to.
I would agree with that. I think it needs to be way more accessible. At least people need to be taught, how to question themselves and how to find answers. But I just looked and holy shit, we're way over an hour.
We didn't even talk about Profane.
No,
we didn't.
So yeah, talk about Profane for a minute, and yeah.
Well, what do you want to know about Profane?
Just want to give our listeners a brief.
What is it, and how they can get in contact with you guys?
Well, Profane Existence is the oldest still running anarchist punk publication and record label. There's different components to it. There's the part that puts on shows and tours for bands. There's the part that puts out albums. And there's the web zine, which used to be the print zine. And we're hoping to get a print zine again. In order to do that, we need to raise a few $1,000s, which means we need bands who are activists to set up benefit shows to make that happen if they want to see that happen. You can find Profane Existence easily on the internet, profaneexistence.com. We have a number of writers. Mostly at this point, our writers are people that have been long time involved in both anarchism and punk. There are a lot of people in their 30s. We are actually looking to diversify that a bit and have some younger writers join again, as well as having people that we're specifically looking for more women writers at this point. We only have a few of our writers are women at this current time. What else? Profane's existed since the 90s. I am just one of the writers within the group, so I actually have never been involved with the web store part. It was started by a collective, and largely a person that made it keep going for a lot of years was Dan Siskoy, who runs Brickmania. So if you're really into Lego and military stuff, check out Brickmania also, because that's what he does. He makes his living making military models out of Lego. So he made Profane happen for a lot of years, and it's still going. I would like to see it become important like it used to be, and that I would like to see writers all over that contribute scene reports and updates on activism going on in their communities, and updates on new bands and interviews with bands in their local scene, which means we need a lot more writers to get us to that point. So again, it's profaneexistence.com.
That I would love for that to exist again, it to that level. How can how can people get in contact with you and follow your work?
I guess the easiest way would be to contact me through Profane. I find that I get a lot of people that will add me on Facebook and then get in arguments with me later because they don't act me and we don't have anything in common. So I'm a little hesitant around people just adding me on Facebook. Plus, I don't want to live on Facebook. I try to not use it much. So if you want to get in contact with me directly, you can also email me. My email is prideandunity. That's PRIDEANDUNITY@hotmail.com. And I think you can even find it on the internet by searching.
You just reminded me of an old band I loved, Unit Pride. Anyways.
I've never heard of that. I hope it's a queercore band.
I think they were Belgium? I could be way wrong. I don't remember. I just remember the album cover was purple and had a bunch of extra hands on it.
That would be awesome.
So We end every episode saying "fuck, shit, damn." Would you mind saying for it this week?
Fuck, shit, damn.
Yep,
That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
Sweet.
Well, thank you very much. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great night.
Okay. Good night.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
This week we heard
Edit. More lasers.
you can always have more lasers.
You can always edit them in.
Right now you're listening to
Wax Taylor. Say yes.
Say Yes to Wax.
Taylor. As always.
El Comandantes.
Which side are you on?
Go rate and review us on iTunes. Just do it.
Right now, we'll wait. Thank you. That was awesome. I love that review.
And why you didn't have to be so mean, but it's a fair point. Also, social media. We have all of it. Connect with us there. We do giveaways. We do other things on the social media. We don't try to just spam all the time on there. We want to really engage with you guys. So engage with us.
And our interns have been posting a lot of cool content lately that just trying to get some feedback from everyone else. So stay up to date on that shiznizzle.
You should. Fuck? Is it the fuck part?
No, what else do we do?
I think it's the fuck part.
'Cause we didn't do Amazon.
No.
We haven't said anything about that. We haven't done. We did. Rate this. Oh, let's thank the interns. Let's try that.
Yeah, we should thank the. I'm going to leave all that in, by the way, because I want to thank you interns. So we have Cody and Camden, and then we have Mari the Booker. Without all of them, the whole team, they bring this all to you. So give them a shout out, drop them a line, say you guys are awesome,
and check out their podcast. Cody is going to be releasing Radiculture relatively soon. And that one I'm super excited about. And Camden has 643.
You can also check all those out at whichsidecollective.org. Is it .org? That's right. We decided .org. Man, I almost said
we
.com.
collectively decided.
We did collectively decide that.
Consensus thing because we're anarchists. That's weird.
It was very weird. It's not really weird. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And it wasn't any conflict at all. Everyone's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, half the time it's like, what the fuck ever, man.
Whatever.
Fuck shit damn, man.
Fuck shit damn.
Which Side is produced by the Which Side Media Collective.